and we'll talk about this. What promises have we seen not fulfilled yet? Or what promises have we seen made? Yeah, Dan. Okay, yeah. Yes, God. Who did God promise a land to? Who did God promise a land to? To Abraham. Okay, what else have we seen promised? Descendants. You'll have like a nation come from you to Abraham. What else have we seen promised? Yeah, you'll be a blessing to all the nations. And that's echoed in the Mosaic covenant also when he says you'll be a nation of priests to intercede for the nations. What else have we seen promised? Yeah, that's like at the very beginning. Like somebody will come who will crush the serpent. Why do we need someone to crush the serpent? Yeah, the serpent is the one who brought this curse. Like he's the one who caused the woman to disobey and the man to disobey. So what else have we seen promised? Okay, so God promised David, you will have a throne that will last for eternity. You will never lack someone on your throne. There will always be a king. And he promised, what did he promise to, or Isaac said something to, or no, I'm sorry, Jacob said something to Judah in Genesis 49. Does anyone remember what he said to Judah in regards to kingdom? Yeah, he said, yeah, exactly. The lion from the tribe of Judah is who we refer to. He said, the scepter will not depart from Judah, or the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he whose right it is comes. And there's a similar promise to Abraham also regarding kingship. He said, your offspring will possess the gates of his enemies. Your offspring will possess the gates of his enemies. He'll be a ruler. He'll be a warrior. And possibly has reference to the king. Does anyone remember what Moses said? He said, somebody will come and he will be, yeah. He said, a prophet like me will come. And what will happen when that prophet comes? Yeah, the people will listen to him. So that's what we've seen so far. And we've displayed it like this. This battery's running out on me. We've said there's one promise throughout this whole narrative. And then we have these different promises that gives us glimpses of what this restoration is going to look like when we're brought back to Eden again. So, let's get into today's stuff. The book of Genesis, in my Bible, is on page 1. I'm guessing it's probably on page 1 in your Bible also. What number is the end of Malachi in your Bible? It's like when you know, just call it out. 803. Any other? No? Wow. 1066. In my Bible, 1300. Whoa! He's the really spiritual one. In my large print. In my Bible, it's 818. The book of Kings, which is where we ended. In my Bible, that ends on page 354. So, when it comes to page numbers, the book of Kings is about right here in the story. There are more pages between the end of Kings and the end of Malachi than we've covered so far. Okay, that's a lot of material. But when it comes to the story itself, okay, watch this. When the story itself comes, Kings is about right here. Like the end of Kings is very close to the end of the story. But there's a lot more pages than we've already covered. This is the timeline that we looked at last week. We have Israel on the top, Judah on the bottom. Okay, these are the red are the different kings. Okay, so if we look at when the prophets are happening, it's at the exact same time. It's at the exact same time as the kings. Pretty much. It goes a little bit further, but it's pretty much happening at the same time. To illustrate what the prophets are like, we haven't had a good Lord of the Rings illustration in a long time, so we're going to have another one. Okay, so the Lord of the Rings, the trilogy. Somebody tell me, what is the difference between these movies and these movies? Okay, so it's extended edition. What does that mean? More random orcs. Thank you, Daniel. Okay, yeah, there's more details. Like, there's actually hours added into this version. This version also comes with how many DVDs? Does anyone know? 4 each. So yeah, 12. Sure, if you want to count them all together. So what's in the extra DVDs of this? Does anyone have the extended edition of Lord of the Rings? Yeah, you do. You have to have the extended edition. You have to. But okay, so it has more DVDs, and then on the DVDs it has in it, the word starts with a C. Commentaries. Okay, what's a commentary on when we're talking about movies? It's like the actors and the director talk, and they kind of like give it from their perspective, like what's happening. And that's how we look at the prophets. It's not like it's necessarily like adding a lot to the story, but it's telling the story from God's perspective. And it might like add a few more details that we weren't really aware of when we were going through the story maybe, but for the most part, it doesn't advance the story much. It tells us what we've already seen from God's perspective. Does that make sense? Sweet. Hopefully that was helpful. There are a lot of prophets. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 prophets are divided into major prophets and minor prophets. They're called minor prophets because they dig in caves and look for gold. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. They're called minor prophets because they're shorter, not because they had a less significant ministry or anything like that. There's too much to cover in 1 week. There's just too much, too many pages. There's more pages than we've already covered so far. So we're going to cover just one of these. Does anyone want to guess which one we're going to look at? There's someone I haven't told yet. Micah, no. Yes, Isaiah. We're going to look at the book of Isaiah today. So let's go ahead and turn to Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah is happening. This is before the exile to Babylon that we looked at last week. People are not in the land. But at this point they are. Starting in verse 2. God says, "Listen, heavens, and pay attention, earth, for the Lord has spoken. I have raised children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me. The ox knows its owner, and the donkey its master's feeding trough, but Israel does not know. My people do not understand. O sinful nation, people weighed down with iniquity, blood of evildoers, depraved children, they have abandoned the Lord. They have despised the Holy One of Israel. They have turned their backs on him. Why do you want more beatings? Why do you keep on rebelling? The whole head is hurt. The whole heart is sick. From the sole of the foot even to the head, no spot is uninjured. Wounds, welts, festering sores, not cleansed, bandaged, or soothed with oil." Verse 21, "The faithless city, what an adulteress she has become." This is Israel. Specifically, this is Judah, the southern kingdom. This is not good. And Isaiah's like, okay, look, you guys are disobedient. In fact, he talks about all the nations being disobedient. And because they're disobedient, Isaiah talks about the coming day of the Lord. Let's look at chapter 2, just for an example what this day of the Lord is going to look like. Chapter 2, verse 9, "So all humanity will be brought low. The man is humble. Do not forgive him. Go to the rocks and hide in the dust for the terror of Yahweh. From his majestic splendor, human pride will be humbled, and lofty men will be brought low. The Yahweh alone will be exalted on that day." Verse 21. Verse 20, "On that day people will throw their silver and their gold idols, which they made to worship, the molds and the bats. They will go to caves and rocks and cliffs, and away from the terror of Yahweh and his majestic splendor when he rises to terrify the earth." A day is coming when Yahweh will judge iniquity and sin. He will do it for all the nations, including Israel. So we have to ask the question, will Yahweh be faithful to his people despite their unfaithfulness to him? He's made a promise, but will he keep it if they don't obey? Let's look at chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. He's talking in the midst of all this judgment that he's going to bring upon all of the world. It says, "For the Lord will have compassion on Jacob and choose Israel again. He will settle them in their own land. For the foreigners will be joined to them and united with the house of Jacob." Already we've seen a nation that they would be gathered together again. Land will be gathered there, and foreigners will be joined to them. They're being a blessing to the other nations. They're joined with Israel. The nations will escort Israel and bring it to its homeland, and the house of Israel will possess them as male and female slaves in the Lord's land. This is just screaming the Abrahamic covenant. And make captivity of their captors, and they rule over the oppressors. So, Isaiah is talking about the fact that though God's people are unfaithful, God will be faithful to his covenant promises. So, we're going to split up into groups real quick. I have papers. I don't know how many of these verses we're going to be able to look at, but basically, Josh, can we hand these out? We're going to split up into groups, just whoever's around you or whatever group you guys want to be in. And look at these texts that are written here and ask yourself which promise that we've already seen made in the text are these prophecies prophesying of a fulfillment of. Here you guys go. Just for a reminder of where we've been so far, if this helps, here's our diagram. So just go ahead and just start reading the text and talking about them in the group. We'll spend like 10 minutes on this, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, we're gonna have to start wrapping it up soon. I'm sorry. I know there's a lot of great discussion. I didn't really expect us to get through this list. And that's okay. You guys can take this home and look at it yourself and look at Isaiah. But I want us to get in the mindset of the fact that God has made promises to his people. And that's how we should read the scriptures in light of those promises. Like that, the scriptures are a story. It's one big story from beginning to end. And so they're going to reference things that have happened before. Just like any good story is going to reference some things that have happened before. So let's ask the question real quick. That we're asking, will Yahweh be faithful to his people despite their unfaithfulness to him? What do you guys think? Okay, the answer is yes. We were reading, and every one of the promises that we've seen before have been referenced in these texts that you guys are reading. One thing I want to emphasize is Yahweh's desire for the nations to worship him. Specifically in chapter 19, this is cool, because of all people on earth, that God would choose to worship him. Like one of the most unlikely people groups on earth. Chapter 19, verse 18. On the day 5 cities in the land of Egypt will speak the language of Canaan and swear loyalty to the Lord of hosts. One of the cities would be called City of the Sun. There would be an altar to Yahweh in the center of the land of Egypt, and the pillar of the Lord near her border. Yahweh desires all of the nations to worship him. We've seen this before in the fact that God said to Abraham, through you, all nations of the world will be blessed. The obedience of the people belong to the king from Judah. All the peoples of the earth will come. And God said to Israel, I'll make you a kingdom of priests. This has to do with the nations. Yahweh desires all of the nations to worship him. And even descriptions of the people in these latter days of Israel, in these latter days, it says you will be righteous, and so the nations will come to you. Like that was God's plan for the law from the beginning. The law was never an end in itself. Like we talked about the fact that God wants his people to represent him in a specific way on earth, and so he says this is how you should live. And the reason is so that people will look at God's people and say, they are beautiful. I want to know their God. And God says, one day you will be like that, and the nations will flock to you because they will want to know Yahweh. Who is Yahweh? This is beautiful, the way you live. The way you people live is so beautiful. I want to know your God. So, yes, God will be faithful, but we have to ask the question, how? How can God be faithful to an unfaithful people? We get that answer in chapter 6. Let's look at chapter 6 of Isaiah. It's one of the most well-known texts in the Bible. Isaiah has a vision. It's the year King Uzziah dies. He's one of the great kings in Israel. It's literally, that means the year that all hope in Israel died. All hope is dead. And Isaiah sees a vision. He says, God high and lifted up. And his presence fills the temple. And Isaiah immediately just falls on his face and says, woe is me. I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips. I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen Yahweh. and he can't even speak. He says, I am utterly sinful. And a seraphim, a six-winged angel, comes down and puts a piece of coal on his mouth, and it purifies him. He says in verse 6, the angel says, now that this has touched your lips, your wickedness is removed, and your sin is atoned for. What should the word atoned automatically remind us of? We've already seen. We've already talked about the Day of Atonement. Isaiah's sins are atoned for, but there's no mention of the fact that it's only for a year or only for a day. Isaiah experiences an atonement that is for his sins. His sins are completely atoned for. This is an atonement like something we've never seen before. And so what we're going to find out as we keep reading is that Isaiah experiences on an individual level what Israel will experience, what Israel needs to experience on a national level. Yahweh will permanently atone for the sins of the people. The people's sins need to be atoned for so they can be righteous, so they can love Yahweh. How can God do that? How can he atone for the sins of the entire nation? As we continue reading in Isaiah, first let's turn to chapter 11. It's talking about the day that the Davidic king will come. The root of Jesse will stand in the banner of the people. The nations will seek him. His resting place will be glorious. Verse 11 says, on that day the Lord will extend his hand a second time. What's that? What? So Yahweh will extend his hand a second time. What's the first time that he extended his hand? What's that referring to? He says, I will extend my hand a second time to recover from Assyria and Egypt and Pathros and Cush and Elam and all these nations and the remnant of the people who survive. He's going to gather the people together. Yes. He's referring to the fact that there is going to be another Exodus. Oh, it was on TV. Sweet. That's cool. Okay. I'm glad. Was it on a History Channel? ABC. That's awesome. Look at verse 16 of that chapter. Look at verse 16 of that chapter. It says, there will be a highway for the remnant of the people who survived from Assyria, as there will be from Israel, as when they came up from the land of Egypt. There will be a new Exodus. Were you going to say something, Josh? Mm-hmm. Exactly. And we find later on it talks about when you pass through the waters, they will not overcome you. I will be with you. There is tons of language of a new Exodus that is going to happen, where God's people will be gathered together. How will he accomplish this new Exodus? He talks about this character later on of a servant. And it's really confusing who the servant is. There's a lot of debate about who the servant is. Sometimes you think, oh, it's got to be the nation of Israel. But then it'll say Israel, and then it will refer to Israel as he, like a singular, versus a plural, like they. You would have expected they. So it's wait, what's going on? So is it Israel, or is it a single person? And then it seems to refer to Cyrus, who's the king of Persia, who will bring the people back into the land. This is really confusing. But then we get to Isaiah 52 and 53. This servant who is coming will represent Israel. And it says, see, my servant acts wisely. He'll be raised and lifted up and greatly exalted. He'll be a great person. Just as many were appalled at you. What? His appearance was so disfigured, he did not look like a man. His form not resemblable to a human being. So he will sprinkle many nations. The kings will shut their mouths because of him. For they will see what they have not told them. They will understand what they have not heard. Let's look at verse 6. It talks about this servant who will suffer. It says, yet he himself bore our sicknesses and he carried our pains. Verse 5, it says, but he was pierced because of our transgressions. He was crushed because of our iniquities, and the punishment for our peace was upon him. And we are healed by his wounds. All we like sheep had gone astray. We'd all trusted in our own ways, and the Lord has punished him for the iniquity of us all. Somehow this servant who represents the nation of Israel will take the sins of the people upon himself. Verse 7, he was oppressed and afflicted. He did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, like a sheep silent before his shearers. He did not open his mouth. He was taken away because of the oppression and judgment. And who has considered his fate? For he was cut off from the land of the living. He was stricken because of the people's rebellion. They made his grave with the wicked like a rich man at his death, although he had no violence and he had not spoken deceitfully, yet the Lord was pleased to crush him severely. When you make a restitution offering, the servant's death is a restitution offering, a sin offering. It atones for sins somehow. He will see his seed who prolong his days. In his hands the Lord's pleasure will be accomplished. He will see it in his anguish. He will be satisfied with the knowledge. My righteous servant will justify many, and he will carry their iniquities. Somehow the servant is able to represent the people in an atonement unlike any other we've ever seen. He will take away all the people's sins. And what does this servant accomplish? A new creation. We find in chapters 54 through 65. Let's look at chapter 61. Chapter 60. This is one of the most beautiful chapters in the entire Bible. Verse 3, nations will come, starting to Israel. After the suffering servant accomplishes, he says, nations will come to you, to your light. Kings will, brightness of your radiance, will rise their eyes to look around you. They will gather and come to you. Your sons and daughters from far away, and your daughters will be carried on the hip. Referring to the second Exodus, they'll be brought back to Israel. Verse 6, caravans of camels will cover your land. Young camels from Midian and Ephraim, and all of them from Sheba. They will carry gold and frankincense and proclaim the name of the Lord. All the flocks from Kedar will be gathered to you. All the rams from Naboth will serve you and go up to my altar as an acceptable sacrifice, and will glorify my beautiful house. The nations will flock to Israel. They'll all come. It says, verse 9, yet the islands, yes, the islands will wait for me, but the ships from Tarsus will lead. Your children will go from far away. Verse 10, the foreigners will build up your walls as the kings will serve you. Verse 12, for the nations and the kingdoms that will not serve you will perish. Those nations will be annihilated. The glory of Lebanon will come to you. Verse 16, you will nurse milk from nations and nurse from the breasts of kings. You will know that I, Yahweh, am your Savior, the Redeemer, the Mighty One of Jacob. Nations will come to Israel in this day. Verse 17, I'll bring gold instead of bronze. I'll bring silver instead of iron. There will be huge wealth. Verse 18, the violence will never again be heard of in your land. Verse 19, the sun will no longer be your light by day. The brightness of the moon will shine by night. But the Lord will be an everlasting light, and your God for his splendor. Let's look at chapter 65, 17. 65, 16. Whoever is blessed in the land will be blessed by God of truth, and whoever swears in the land will swear by the God of truth. For the former troubles will be forgotten and hidden from my sight. For I will create a new heaven and a new earth. The past events will not remember or be brought to mind. This servant will accomplish something that will bring a new creation that will be like Eden. He will accomplish an atonement that will change the people. Isaiah proclaims this message, but let's go back to Isaiah 6. How did the people respond to Isaiah's message? We didn't read the rest of Isaiah 6. This is usually missions sermons end in verse 8, but it's what happens after verse 8? Because Isaiah's you know what? I'm going to go. I'm going to go to the nation. I'm going to proclaim this. And God says in verse 9, go, say to the people, keep listening, but do not understand. Keep looking, but do not perceive. Dull the minds of the people and deafen their ears and blind their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes. They might hear with their ears and understand with their minds and turn and be healed. God is sending Isaiah to proclaim a message of atonement, new creation, forgiveness that the people will not hear because the people's hearts are hard. And Isaiah's like, God, how long do I have to proclaim this? This is terrible. In verse 11, until cities lie in ruin without inhabitants, and houses are without people, and land is ruined and desolate, and the Lord drives away people far away. Proclaim this, and they will be deaf. And keep proclaiming it until my judgment is accomplished. There will be judgment for Israel. So this atonement that's coming will come later, a lot later than we expected. Let's go outside the book of Isaiah real quick to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 8. To look at what the people are like. Ezekiel is prophet. He's a prophet. He's prophesying, and God takes him and he gives him a vision of what's happening in the temple. It's Ezekiel's right before Daniel, right after Jeremiah. It's Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, I believe. To read verse 5. The Lord said to me, Son of man, just referring to Ezekiel, look towards the north. So I looked towards the north, and there was an offensive statue in the north gate of the entrance. He's looking at the temple. He says, there's an offensive statue. He says, do you see what they're doing here? The most detestable things in the house of Israel are committing. So that I must depart from my sanctuary? You will see even more detestable things. Verse 11, 70 elders from the house of Israel were standing before them, with Jezaniah the son of Shaphan standing among them. Each had a fire pan in his hand, and a fragrant cloud of incense was rising. He said to me, Son of man, what do the elders of the house of Israel do in the darkness? Each at the shrine of his own idols. For they're saying, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has abandoned the land, referring to Abraham. He said, again, you will see even more detestable things. Verse 15, he said to me, do you see this, Son of man? Verse 14. So he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the Lord's house. This is the temple that God is dwelling in, that Solomon built last week. Well, not last week, but we covered it last week. At the north gate of the Lord's house, and I saw a woman there weeping for Tammuz. He is a false god. In the temple of Yahweh, there is worship to false gods. It gets worse. Verse 16, so he brought me, God keeps saying, you will see even more detestable things in this. If you think this is bad, just wait. Verse 16, so he brought me to the inner courts of the Lord's house, and about 25 men at the entrance of the temple, between the portico and the altar, where their backs were turned to the Lord's temple. They're away from the Lord's temple, they're facing away from it, and they're turned to the east, and they were bowing down to the east to worship the sun. God's people have forsaken him. They are utterly wicked. How does God respond to this? In Ezekiel 10 and 11. Chapter 10, then I looked above the expanse of the heads of the cherubim. They were standing like sapphire stone, resembling the sphere of the throne that appeared before them. And the Lord spoke to them in the clouds, go and listen, we will work beneath the cherubim. Fill your hands with hot coals among the cherubim and scatter them over the city. This judgment that's going to come in the city. And then we find out in verse 15, the cherubim who are with Yahweh, the cherubim ascended. These were the living creatures I had seen by the Shabar Canal. When the cherubim moved, the wheels moved beside them and lifted their wings to rise from the earth. Even the wheels did not veer away from them. When the cherubim stood still, the wheels stood still. When they ascended, the wheels ascended from them. For the spirit of the living creatures was with them. 18, but the glory of Yahweh moved away from the threshold of the temple. The glory of God of Israel was above them. It stood at the entrance of the eastern gate of the Lord's house. Chapter 11. Verse 22, the cherubim with the wheels beside them lifted their wings, and their glory of Israel was above them. And the glory of the Lord's rose up from within the city and stood on the mountain east of the city. And the glory of God that was in this temple, that was God's presence among his people, like that we saw in the wilderness, and like this cloud and this fiery pillar, and then went into the tabernacle, right? Remember that? And then it went into the temple. It was so thick that people couldn't even enter. The glory of Yahweh from the temple, it departs. And God's presence leaves his people. When was the last time we saw that people were so sinful that God couldn't dwell with them? Anything come to mind? The flood, Noah, sure. But like when God's presence was so like real, and God said, I cannot live with these people anymore. I have to get rid of them. Yeah, the last time we saw that was here. Like God cannot dwell with sinful people. So before he said, I'm going to remove you from myself. And he's doing that again, only this time it's not them being kicked out of the land. It's God saying, I am leaving this land and I am going away. And he rises up from the leaves. Because the people do not follow Yahweh. But there's promise. For the 5 minutes you have left, let's look at Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah chapter 31. Jeremiah is another prophet. He's prophesying. He's talking about the fact that these people hate God. In fact, he says their sin is written and engraved on their hearts. They sin so much, like it's literally written with a pen on their hearts. And then he says in verse 31 of chapter 31, verse 31. Easy to remember. 31. He says, "Look, the days are coming." This is Yahweh's declaration, "when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah." This will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, a covenant they broke, even though I had married them. This is the Lord's declaration. Instead, this will be a covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days. This is the Lord's declaration, when I will put my teachings within them and write them on their hearts. Sin will not be written on the people's hearts. Rather, righteousness and God's law. The closest Moses could get to write it to the people loving the law was to write it on their foreheads and their wrists and above their doors and repeat it to their children. This says Yahweh's law will be written on their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. No longer will one teach his neighbor and brother, saying, "Know Yahweh," for they will all know me, from the greatest of them to the least of them. This is Yahweh's declaration: I will forgive their wrongdoings and never again remember their sin. A day will come when Yahweh's people will love him from the heart because the law is written on their heart. They want to do it. Like we have to say, this is a prophecy of the new creation that we're talking about, when the people are righteous and the nations flock to them. Let's look at Ezekiel 36. This is right before, this is the chapter prior to the Valley of Dry Bones that Pastor Tim read about this morning. Ezekiel prophesies of this new covenant also. Ezekiel 36:24. He says, "I will take you from the nations and gather you from all countries and will bring you into your own land." Again, a reference to the second Exodus. "I will sprinkle clean the waters of you, and you will be clean, and I will cleanse you from all impurities and idols. I will give you a new heart. I will put a new spirit within you. I will remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. I will place my spirit within you and cause you to follow my statutes and carefully observe my laws. Then you will live in the land that I gave to your fathers. You will be my people, and I will be your God. I will save you from all your uncleanness and summon the grain and make it plentiful. I will not bring famine upon you. I will also make the fruit of the trees and the produce of the field plentiful, so that you will no longer experience reproach from the nations on account of the famine." There is a day that is coming when Yahweh will make his people beautiful in this new creation. And Yahweh will do something that is absolutely amazing. He will change the hearts of the people to love him. And when they love him, they will no longer reject the message of his prophets, like they did for all these prophets. They just reject them. They will have a heart of flesh instead of a heart of stone. Instead of sin written on their hearts, they will have the law of Yahweh written on their hearts. So they will love his law. They will love him. This will most likely be accomplished through the suffering servant that we learned about, who will atone for the sins of the people and somehow will represent the nation of Israel. And maybe this person is the same person who will crush the head of the serpent and make everything right again. Maybe he is the person who will possess the gates of his enemies, the person who will bring the obedience to the people, the person who will be a prophet like Moses, the person who will rule from David's throne forever. And we leave with a sinful people and promise of a new covenant. A covenant will be way better than anything we've ever seen before. And it'll be beautiful and a new creation. But we need this new covenant. So, come back next week.